Welcome to the Elevating La Cultura podcast, a space where I talk with Latinas who are passionate about what they do and are willing to share that passion with others to change the narrative, especially for the next generation. Each season is centered around different topics, but all with the Latina perspective. Welcome to a mini summer season as I'm out in Pennsylvania for the summer. All right, let's get into it. Michelle is a trauma-informed, certified coach on a mission to support leaders to value their strengths, grow their confidence, build a clear vision for their life and leadership, and find ease to sustain as a leader for as long as they choose. With a background of executive coaching, experience consulting, leading as an administrator in K-12 education, and serving as a nonprofit executive, Michelle has navigated what it means to be a leader in various contexts. Over the decades, she has supported numerous leaders with consciously developing a personal vision for leadership, building self-awareness and courage to lead with an equity lens, and growing their sustainability by incorporating nervous system regulation into their routines. Enjoy our conversation. Hey, I am so excited to have Michelle on the podcast today. We met a long time ago, connected through other mutual friends, and this has been a long time coming, so I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. You are part of my Chicago Connect, even though I don't make it out there as much these days, but I used to spend a lot of time out there. But I am now in California. I'm LA based. I am a Latina, California born and raised in the Central Valley here before moving to LA. And so Mexican background, farm worker background on my maternal side. My dad is from Venezuela and grew up very much appreciating both cultures and being able to make that a part of my life over the years, which I'm sure we'll get into through the story of assimilation, then going against that, and now being in a place of just being able to fully understand who I am, what I'm about, and get to bring that to the coaching space because now I am a leadership coach and speaker.
I think that's something that we related to when we first connected was that assimilation piece when we were younger and trying to figure out during those early formative years how to navigate the spaces that we were in and the journey that brought us to where we are in appreciating the fullness, the complexity of who we are as Latinas. So I'd love to know what brought you to where you are today in the coaching space.
Yeah, when I tell my leadership story, which essentially becomes my story to coaching, I always start with 5 years old, I feel was the beginning of the assimilation journey. And I'm sure it happened way before that, but that's kind of the piece that I remember the most. And I think of that because I grew up in a Spanish-speaking home. Both my parents, my grandparents, everybody spoke to me in Spanish. I did not speak English. And then when I started school, overnight, only English, no more speaking Spanish. My grandmother used to always say that I would call it the funny language, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Thankfully, my family never stopped speaking to me in Spanish. I would respond in English because they all understood, but they would speak to me in Spanish, so I always kept an ear for it. And so it wasn't until probably around 18 where I was like, I think I want to learn it again. And so I started taking Spanish my last couple years of high school, then took a lot of Spanish classes in college, and college became this awakening where I started to kind of be like, oh, this discomfort, this thing about me wanting to kind of reclaim is because I actually shouldn't have lost all of that culture over all those years. And so then in college, I was, taking Chicano studies and African American studies and women's studies and all those classes and just really learning that the experience I had was not just mine, right? Because you start to think it's just me. I was identified as GATE when I was younger. And so I took a bunch of advanced classes, AP classes, usually the only or maybe one of a handful of Latinas in any of those classes. And so I had just very much felt different. And college was the space where I was like, I'm not different. I just didn't have space to be me. And so now I know the languages that I assimilated. And so I think it was learning all of this language and understanding what I'd experienced that then I was like, I don't want anyone else to have to experience that. And so when I left college, I went into a multicultural bilingual teacher credentialing program and then became a teacher in a migrant community, which was similar to what I had grown up around in the Central Valley. And from there, really got to appreciate and integrate the families into the work we did. I was always going to their homes, and I would always say, you have to actually opt out of me doing parent meetings, parent teacher conferences in your home. And we had trailer parks and apartment complexes around our campus. So I would just walk over after school and hang out there. And so it very much became part of my journey to be very much in community, to be very much about elevating culture and not making it something that had to be in the shadows. And then from there, moved into leadership. For a while there, I was a high school principal that then thought, I want to be a superintendent someday. So my path started taking me down all the degrees to be able to get there. So I had an admin credential, I had a master's degree, I went and got my doctorate. The research I did during my doctoral years was about the systemic devaluation of Latino students and seeing how, again, my experience was not just mine, and there were others that had way more assimilation type, like forced experiences in their education journeys. And so I would say now, as I ended up leaving K-12 and realizing that's actually not for me, I started to realize, like, actually, I want to create spaces where folks of color can realize and reclaim all of the things that, unfortunately, in the beginning of our schooling, we're taught is wrong with us, is not the way to be. Actually, if you reclaim it all, there's power in it. There's an opportunity for us to do things differently. And so now, as a leadership coach, I work with a variety of folks, but the majority of my clients are Latinas and people of color. And a lot of them are trying to figure out, how do I actually know what it means to authentically be me? Because we use that term a lot, but people can't really define it. How do I actually understand what it means for me to be authentic? And then to actually have the confidence and to find the safety to show up that way every day in leadership to do something different. So it's kind of been an evolution of experience and philosophy to get to this place where I want more of us to be able to reclaim space and to actually have a purpose in doing that. And so I now help folks through coaching and speaking to figure that out for themselves.
That's amazing. And I think that is a conversation that we need to continue bringing to the table and to the forefront of this, like, as business owners and as leaders. Like, this is a conversation that is going to be evolving for years to come, especially as we bridge to the next generation. And what really stood out to me in what you were saying was this complex space we find ourselves in when we think about, like, what is authentic? Like, what is authentic leadership to me specifically? Because yes, we have this cultural essence, this cultural background in our bones, in our blood. But at the same time, being raised and living in the US, like, we have those lived experiences as well. And we have this balance of two worlds. And we talk about, like, being de aquí, de allá, y ni de aquí, ni de allá. And it's just a conversation that I think our generation is going to be continuing to have as we guide the next generation. And it's interesting because my daughter is experiencing something similar. And I feel like I, as a parent, have gone through this journey of realizing, like, I assimilated, and now I can give my daughter a different foundation, which is great. But at the same time, she's having all of these complex thoughts and feelings at her young age as a teenager, whereas I, as an adult, am able to communicate and kind of, like, have a community around me to have these discussions. And so I'm finding it even harder to help her navigate through it as I'm also navigating through it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on just the complexity of this conversation as a whole. When was the last time you had a real conversation about your health? Not the whispered worries or the questions you're afraid to ask, but the bold, honest truth about what your mind and body need. Okay, I'm gonna be real. As I get closer to my 40s, I keep wondering what is happening in my body. Is this perimenopause, something I should be worried about, or is this all just in my head? If you want answers from experts who actually get the cultural barriers we face as Latinas, this is for you. Join us for Fuerte and Fearless, an evening panel discussion on Tuesday, August 13th. We're bringing together a therapist, psychiatrist, and women's health nurse practitioner for the conversations our Cultura needs to have. No more secrets, no more shame, just real talk about hormones, mental health, reproductive choices, and everything in between. Because your health is your power, and it's time you owned it. Reserve your spot today at elevatinglacultura.com/fuerte and fearless, because you deserve answers, not silence.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first part is we just don't talk about it enough. We like to throw the word around. There was actually a reel that I saw recently where they were making fun of how everybody now wants to use the word authenticity. And it was like this fake panel and they kept saying authentic like every other word. And it was funny because it's true. Like we start to pick up certain lingo and we keep repeating it and we have some sense of what it means, but we don't actually know what it means for us. So I think the first part is let's talk about it. So an example I give folks is I used to be married. I thought I was going to be a stay-at-home mom at one point in my life. And as we were married for a few years and it kept going and I just kept being like, gosh, why am I not feeling this urge to have a baby? I'm watching everybody around me like trying to get pregnant and do this and I'm just not feeling it. And when I really sat with it and started reflecting on it, I was like, do I actually identify as somebody who wants to be a mother, or is that something I took on societally, culturally, and just assumed that was the identity I was supposed to have? And so it took a lot of conversation for, my ex and I to finally get to a place where it was like, I just need to be honest with you. I don't have that desire. And I can't imagine it's ever going to come. I think it was just something that I was conditioned to believe was the identity I was supposed to have. And it took a while to get there. And it took a long series of conversations and just me sitting and reflecting. But that's one that's a narrative for a lot of us, even as women, right? Do we assume that that's who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to want? But do we ever actually sit with somebody when we're younger or in our early 20s or later in our lives to actually understand what is it about that may be calling us or not? What is it about that identity that fits or doesn't? And so I think part of the journey is being able to reflect periodically and starting young around, you say that you're really into skateboarding. What is it that you enjoy about that? And if they can't really name anything that has to do with them and it's all about everything that everybody else is doing, then that's them adapting to the surrounding, not necessarily being really clear about who they are. And that continues on. And I actually have a workshop I've done before on authenticity. And I tell folks, it's not that you have one time where you sit down, you figure out your identities and it's done. It evolves, right? To use that example again, for a while, I thought that I very much did identify with being a wife and a potential mother. That nowhere sits in my realm of identity now. So I have to sit at certain points and ask myself, what identities were true for me at this stage of my life that are still true now or not true anymore? And I need to thank you and set you aside. And what are some that I'm actually aspiring to? Because I'm not there yet, but I also have some identities I want to move into. I'm a speaker right now. I am a speaker who predominantly speaks in California and around the United States. I aspire to have an identity of being a global speaker. So there could be identities that we are releasing. There could be identities that we are definitely strongly sitting in right now, and there could be some we're aspiring to. But how often do we actually sit around and talk about that? That's where I think we actually would know how to define what our authenticity is. Let's just talk about it.
That's amazing. And I admit I've never thought of authenticity that way either. Or like I have not thought recently, like what is my identity right now? I think in this fast-paced world, that's something that we don't take enough time for. And we're just kind of like going with the flow of things at times, just because things are so busy and changing so much. But specifically in the past, 9 months, I know a lot of my fellow peers, entrepreneurs, leaders have been really hit with like this, and I don't even know how to explain it. I wouldn't say it's necessarily all lumped into like depression or anxiety, but it's this this feeling of uncertainty that we sit with, and we can't necessarily be as like certain about the choices that we were certain about, let's say last year, 2 years ago. And I think, like, just speaking as a whole, like, once everything happened with in 2020, I think we just kind of took a step back and we're like very reflective. And then as things started to shift in 2022, we were like, okay, let's, like, we took time to reflect. Let's get out there. Let's, like, we had motivation to do the work in our communities. And now, especially with who the administration is, we're back to that uncertainty. And it's kind of like, well, we thought we had reflected, we thought we had grown and like figured it all out. And now we just don't even know what to do. And I think there's just this, like, it's like we hit a block. And even if we were to reflect, it's just like, even if I want to reflect for what we want, like, you know, as businesses, we usually do like the 1 year, 5 year, 10 year mark. But at this point, it's just like, we don't even know what's going to happen like next month, let alone next year, 5 years, 10 years. So what is your take on this place that we find ourselves in collectively as Latinas, as business owners, as humans in the world today?
Yeah. There's so many juicy nuggets there and like so many ways to take that. But I'll start with you mentioned, discomfort and kind of where we're at right now. And I usually do this as a leadership talk, but I think it applies to everybody is, part of being a leader is you have to be very comfortable with discomfort because not everybody's going to like you. Crazy, stressful scenarios are being thrown at you multiple times in a day, all that. And so to be able to be a successful leader means you're going to have to be able to navigate all the things that come your way. Unfortunately, now, just as the day-to-day person, we have to be able to navigate everything that comes our way because you can be getting just as many stressful situations thrown at you as what typically might have been reserved for a certain group of people. And for me, the answer to that is we have to be able to do nervous system regulation and we have to be able to go internally and into our bodies, which is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I've been on this journey for quite some time and I still have moments where I'm like, I don't feel like it. I'd rather repress it and watch TV, or I'm fully aware that I'm zoning out right now and looking at social media, but I'm going to do it anyway. So even as somebody who's been very consciously growing in this area, I still find myself being like, even though I have the tools, I just don't even feel like using them right now. So I think part of it is just accepting that there's going to be some uncomfortable stuff. Can I push myself to learn more about what I'm experiencing and what's happening in my body? So at least I have a toolkit for when things become a little too chaotic for me to be able to handle. And I don't want to zone out all the time. So with that, our bodies are meant to keep us alive, keep us safe. I think of my grandmother who came here from Mexico. She was undocumented, coyote. She had babies coming across the rio, right? And that's literally life or death. And there's many stories I'm sure that I don't even know of before her that were very specific stories of life or death situations. That's not the life that I live, and that's not the scenarios that I typically in my life on a day-to-day have been in. But my body is still functioning day-to-day in those extreme life or death situations. How can I actually support my body to know the difference between this feels maybe psychologically unsafe or unsafe in other ways, but not necessarily life or death, so that I can calm myself enough to have some clarity to think? And so, we hear a lot of people nowadays talking about somatics, right? So really somatics is just how can we use exercises to calm our bodies down and be able to kind of shake off energy. And what that does is in those moments when we're feeling really uncomfortable and you might feel your body tensing or you're getting a headache or I can't sleep right now, which is a lot of what I'm hearing from people. How can we actually go into our bodies and start to train them to find calm, even when there's a lot of chaos and discomfort around us? And the reason that's so important is not only because hopefully you'll sleep better and not have as many headaches and have just more peace in your life, but also that's in service of you now knowing how to be available to fight back to the things that you consider injustices right now. So I mean, to go along with the conversation about authenticity, who I was as an activist in my 20s is not going to look the same now at 46. And so, me actually having more clarity, not freaking out, zoning out over every single news article coming my way because it's too much too fast. How do I stay informed, check in with my body, and make sure I can find some calm when it makes me feel really activated? And then, with that calm, actually have clarity for who I am in this moment to be able to respond to all the things that are happening. And what I'm seeing is a lot of folks who are really dysregulated and freaking out. And then from there, making decisions, sharing information online that may not actually be accurate or true, and just kind of jumping at the first thing that makes them feel something. But in reality, your body just wants you to calm down and stop feeling so much and not feeling so over energized. So it's not I want to be very clear. This is not spiritual bypassing. It's not the whole like just pray it away and it'll all be fine. But it's being able to calm your nervous system, to have some clarity, to know how you can respond the best way that you can for yourself and for the situation you're in, to the things that you're seeing around you that you don't agree with and you want to fight back on.
It's so important as leaders, especially to have that piece in our toolkit, because just as I think I was talking to someone recently, and we were talking about how, as a photographer, whenever I'm coming into a situation, it doesn't matter the stress that I went through to get there. Once I'm there, I need to be able to regulate my body, because if I'm coming into a photo session stressed and like chaotic, that is also going to be transferred to my client, who just is wanting to get some photos taken of them, especially if it's like a family session. I can't be coming in there chaotic and stressed and stressing the family out. They're already stressed, and it's my job as a photographer to be able to regulate myself so that I can then regulate that family into getting beautiful photos. And I think that pertains to anyone who is in that leadership position, as a business owner, as just anyone, even if you're not a business owner, if you have a family, if you have nieces and nephews, being able to tap into that to regulate yourself will have that, like, create that safe space, which is what we want for our community and for the next generation, whether we're a teacher, we're like caretakers. We want to be able to set that safe space so that we could have these conversations in a mature, regulated way, so we can facilitate conversations with our kids, with our students, in a safe and regulated way. So I love that you spoke on that, because at first, when I first worked with a somatic movement coach, I was like, I don't need to move my body. But once I was like, okay, let me just be present. And I was like, this is amazing. And this is part of reclaiming our culture as well. And I think there are things that we need to shift in our minds that come from like that colonized mentality to keep us oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, like, what is that biggest mindset shift that you feel like you went through in order to bring you to the place that you're at today and the work that you do?
Yeah. And I just thought of like five more examples while you were talking about what you just said of how this stuff is playing out. So let's see if I can sprinkle it in as we're chatting. But the starting point, moving into teaching first, because I still think that is always the foundation. When I'm speaking, I'm still being a teacher. When I'm coaching, I'm still thinking in that mindset. And, like I said, my philosophies now where I'm at all come from back there. So I feel like it always goes back to teaching. Honestly, it wasn't about the profession. I think when I first went into it, it was more about, I went to school at UC Davis, which is right outside of Sacramento. There's migrant communities around Sacramento. And the highest paying job I could get in college was actually working as a teacher's assistant in the migrant camps. And so I was like, well, let me add this to my barista job and my other jobs that I had. And I used to do that on top of everything else in the summertime. And during that time, I just very much, again, it was like coming back to home. I loved being around the families. I loved being able to interact with the kids and being able to help them to have fun in the summer and have play. I was actually a puppeteer, so I would do puppet shows at the camps and I would teach them how to make their own puppets and stuff. So really it started out as just, there was something about the comfort of the environment that was calling me back. It turned out that the profession worked out for me too. And I think there was a lot of skills I learned during that time that have just helped me to understand the ways that people listen, the ways that people learn, and how to interact with people in a way that actually can be absorbed and understood. And then from there, I was just kind of following a bunch of other Latinas. Being a bilingual education teacher means I had a lot of other Latina teachers around me. So whereas other folks say they go into teaching and they're like, I'm the only one, I had the opposite experience. My colleagues were predominantly Latinas. My principal was a Latina because I worked in a bilingual school. And then from there, I just kept meeting other Latina leaders who just kept kind of telling me, this is what you do next. So in the beginning, I was just following the lockstep. You get this job and then you get this job and then you get this job. And oh yeah, eventually I'll be a superintendent and that's where I'll retire. But to go back to the body piece, in the beginning, it was exciting and I was into it. And after a while, I just started noticing I just felt so heavy. It was getting harder to get out of bed in the morning. There was conversations I found myself avoiding that I wasn't avoiding before. The excitement that I used to feel in the beginning where I'd be like, yay, football Friday. I was now like, oh, I got to go to the football game. Like just everything about my energy was starting to shift and I could feel it. And I remember thinking, I don't want to be that person who continues to be in this space when I'm not excited about it and I can't fully give what I was giving before. So I started really noticing my body was engaging differently. My energy was showing up differently in the space. So I actually took a 6-month sabbatical after I left K-12 to just try to figure out life. I was like, look, I've got a good resume. I've got a bunch of degrees. There's got to be something for me out there. And that was, I would say, the beginning of me really moving into this world of understanding body and slowing down and meditation. That's when I discovered yin yoga, which is like a stretching and meditative yoga. And I started doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of reading and just trying to understand what was the experience I just had? What about those last 15 years didn't quite land? And what does this mean moving forward? And that's actually what moved me into Chicago, because then I moved into the nonprofit world. The founder of the nonprofit that I opened in the Bay Area was actually in Chicago. And from there, then started realizing, okay, I'm feeling energized again. I'm feeling passionate, I'm feeling excited. We did leadership development work with Black, Latinx, and Asian Pacific Islander education leaders in the Bay. And I started getting the energy back. I started feeling the excitement again. But then I started not doing a lot of the stuff I'd been doing during the sabbatical because it was like, oh, I don't need it anymore. So then I started just like thriving off of the passion and the excitement, but not necessarily keeping the practices. I think I went to one yin yoga class in all the years I lived in Oakland. I would go to a meditation here and there, but it was not a consistent part of my practice anymore. And it's almost like I was like, well, that was good for those 6 months. And then I just, maybe 80% of it let it go. But then 4 years later, I started feeling the energy shifting again. I started noticing my body was changing again. And it was just like the engagement and the excitement from the beginning wore off. And so it was kind of like, I can't keep living in these cycles of just like something new and exciting until it's not anymore. And then something new and exciting till it's not anymore. 2020 hits. It just so happened I'd actually gotten certified as a coach. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but I had a coach I was working with, absolutely adored her, and was like, at some point I might want to do something with coaching. So thankfully had done that before the pandemic hit, and then suddenly had this time to really sit with it. And that's when I wrote a group coaching program called Chingona Sabbatical, where I started taking other Latinas through the journey of understanding what their purpose was. In the midst of that, I joined a group program. And I remember the marketing that caught me it was something about entrepreneurs open businesses as a trauma response. And I remember I was like, hold up, I feel called out right now. And I really got interested in like, what does that mean? And it was actually a nervous system regulation, somatics, that's not what they called it, but is really what I took away from it program. So for 6 months, I learned all about my nervous system. I learned about what trauma-informed care meant. I understood my patterns of what I had been doing in leadership for so long. I'm now able to see that in other folks as well and understand that. And then from there, started getting into things like internal family systems and just all this stuff about understanding the body. Now I understand it's just for life. It's not a come and go. This will be a journey for me forever to always be resetting, to always be checking in, to always be taking care of myself so I don't get to a point of burnout or overwhelm or I just can't do this anymore. And when I think about, like the example you just gave of you regulating your energy for your client, I can see and feel when people walk into a space and they're dysregulated. And I can feel the way they're trying so bad to put that on somebody else because they don't want to navigate it or feel it. But in reality, if they actually just sat, and it doesn't all have to be the same for everybody. You don't ever have to do yoga. You don't ever have to meditate, and you can still do somatic exercises and regulate your nervous system. But in whatever way you need to do that, so that way you are better able to engage with people and you're not actually repelling things that are meant for you, but you're drawing them in. And, I think of two specific examples while you were chatting. Right now we have the ice raids happening in LA, and I have a lot of clients who are leaders running organizations on the front lines of that. And I have a client who was one of the first raids that happened, months ago, was the person who their organization was trying to get the names, and she was doing the media for what had happened and tracking and all that kind of stuff. And it just so happened we had scheduled 4 hours together, and she walked into the room. And the minute she walked into the room, I immediately was just like, we're not talking about strategic plan today. And I didn't say it to her, but I could just feel it the minute she walked in. And she immediately wanted to jump in. And I said, actually, can we pause for a minute? Have you eaten? She was like, no. Did you sleep last night? No. I said, have you had any water? No. This person is giving of herself in emergency situations as she needs to. But if she never gets to actually sit and take care of herself, that's where we have people burning out in movement work. That's where we have people leaving nonprofits, not doing all this. And I said, before we do any of that, I want to take you to go get some lunch. I want you to drink some water. And can we just do a little bit of somatics together for a little bit? And so we picked something that she felt comfortable with for I was like, just 5 minutes, just give me 5 minutes. And we did it together, and she cried the entire time. And when we were done, I said, how are you feeling? Do you feel like you can move on, or do you feel like you need more of that? And she said, I think I just needed that 5 minutes. We went and got her something to eat. She drank. So let's say 30 minutes of our time was devoted to just taking care of her and giving her a place to come down. And then we got into the stuff that she needed to do to be able to go back and lead. She needed 30 minutes. Sometimes you don't need 30 minutes, but she obviously had a very extreme situation she was coming from. But if we don't do that, she would have had no clarity to keep leading the work that she was doing. One more example I'll give you that I experienced on the other end. So also, unfortunately, in LA, we got a lot of stuff going on. We had the fires in January. My area did not burn, but I was a mile from the perimeter. So tons of smoke. It was overwhelming, the amount of smoke that was in my neighborhood. So I decided, even though I wasn't in fire range, I was still going to move a little. I moved 2 hours or an hour away just to get away from the smoke. My phone was blowing up. People who were like, you need to get out of there. You need to get out of there. And I was like, I'm safe. You're not okay. And I was just like, I'm safe. And I was like, why are these people not trusting me and freaking out? But what I realized at one point is sometimes when you're a bystander who's watching from afar and you're not there, you are still stressed out and you're taking the remnants of all that stress because you're watching it on the news, and they have nothing to do with it. So it's like their way of solving that was to try to fix me. I don't need you to fix anything. I'm good. And I'm doing nervous system regulation. I was volunteering. I was helping with things in LA. I was like, I'm volunteering and I'm helping and I'm doing what I need to do, and I'm still safe. You need to take a breath and go do some somatics because you're overwhelmed by what you're watching on TV and you feel this need to do something, and you're putting that on me. So I think there's both ends of it. You can be the person who's experiencing somebody's unregulation being thrown on you, and you need to know how to be like, that's yours, not mine. And as people like us who do people-centered work, we also have to do it so that we can be the person who regulates the people that we're working with if they come to us and they're just not ready to receive yet.
Ooh, yes, that is a lot. I remember in January, I was supposed to come in for a conference, and then it ended up getting canceled last minute because of the fires. And yeah, it was just a chaotic time, even if you weren't there, because like you said, we're watching on TikTok, we're watching people's stories, the behind the scenes, plus what is on the news, and trying to stay informed. And it's a lot. It's a lot when you hear stories in different cities, and then it's like you're already anticipating something happening like that in your city. I mean, just being in Chicago, we're hearing news of the raids in LA, and then a few days later, we start seeing it in Chicago as well. And then there's it is a lot. And I do admit that like it is easier to just doom scroll on social media or completely disassociate and watch reality TV so that you're just not a part of it. But that is not actually helpful in the grand scheme of things of learning how to regulate as leaders. And I got called out by my son today because I sat down for a few minutes and I was like, he was doing something on the computer and I was scrolling and I was like, "Oh, have you seen this TikTok?" And he was like, "Mom, are you doom scrolling? I'm not even doing that on my YouTube shorts or I'm not even on TikTok. And you're over here telling me that I need to do blah, 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 blah. And you're over there asking me if I watch a TikTok. And I'm just like, okay, you're right. Let me go do some work." um, so it's so funny how sometimes like we need to be called out, especially like with the younger generation. Like I'm always so proud when my kids call me out and say like you shouldn't be like worried about that, or like why are you taking this out on me when you're stressed and I'm over here just living my life. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're right. It just needs that, like, you just need that one person to be like, hey, let's let's take it back and see what is really going on in your body, in your mind. What are you putting in? What are you like feeding yourself? All the things. So yeah, I love that you touched on all those things because I think it is so important, especially if we are doing community work, to always be like, oh, I just need to give more. And if I just skip this meal, I'll be able to continue writing this grant. But it's not going to be your best work if you are hungry, if you haven't eaten all day, if you haven't like hydrated yourself or taken time to just like be off screens and reset. Um, so yeah, I love that. What is the like the most um, common advice that you give to business leaders when they're first starting to work with you that you're just like, okay, let's start here because we need to like start here at the foundation before we do everything.
Yeah. I mean, there's like the bigger picture stuff and then there's the technical stuff, right? So bigger picture, I still am very much a believer in people being clear on their purpose. So I ran 5 cohorts of Chingona sabbatical and then I put it on the shelf last year and kind of dreaming about maybe something else now. But I still very much believe that if we're very clear on what our purpose is, what is the thing I am meant to be doing in the world, that will help you to make a lot of decisions quickly in terms of where you go next. Being a business owner is no joke. And so on the technical end, get yourself a therapist, get yourself a coach. Like I meet with my therapist every other week. I have a coach that I work with. There's so much personal stuff that's going to come up in business. And if you aren't ready to identify and be able to work through some of the things that get triggered in you like as a person, separate from business, plus on top of that, there's going to be stuff that comes up in your business. That's where folks, I think, give up quickly or are not able to have clear mind to know how to navigate times like these, where maybe I was doing one type of service and it was getting a lot of money, but now I have to pivot in some way. How do I want to pivot? I feel like when you're clear on your purpose, that's going to navigate you through these times and it gives you something to ground you in. And then technically you need people to talk about that with. So get clear on why you're even starting a business in the first place. And this is something that came to me when I was in the nonprofit world. And I used to bring this up all the time and I still bring it up with folks now. Is that actually something that needs to be created? Because I think there's a lot of folks of color already doing great work in nonprofit world, doing great work in businesses. And so are you replicating something that you saw somebody else doing? Can you just go support them in their purpose? Or is this actually something very special, very unique to you that you are meant to do? Because that's going to make a difference between how hard it is for you to launch, how hard it is for you to find clients, and for you to really find your place in this world and in this work. Now, that means that there could be, there's thousands of podcasts at this point. That doesn't mean you don't go start a podcast, but be very clear why you're starting it and what's different about you. If you're going to start a business, if you're going to start a nonprofit, whatever it is you're going to start, have you actually done the work to understand this is my purpose? This is how doing this is going to further my purpose in the world. And this is the thing that's very unique about me to launch this on my own, as opposed to this is my purpose, important work for me to do. I can support somebody else. So, when I like launching the nonprofit in the Bay Area, very much believed in the work. It was very aligned with where I saw myself and my purpose at the time in terms of supporting leaders of color, but I didn't need to go create it from scratch. I was able to partner with somebody who'd already founded something, and I was able to open an office of theirs in this location, wholeheartedly believed in her dream and her purpose, but was able to also live mine at the same time. Now in my business, I constantly check in with myself. Do I feel like I am still serving in a unique way that matches my purpose and helps me to understand my client better and to offer them something that doesn't exist right now? And I'm actually in a season right now, though I've given myself the last 2 months to really sit in that question. I have never considered myself a DEI coach. I've never considered myself somebody who does equity work, but I've been put in that umbrella with a lot of businesses and organizations I worked with in the past because I'm a Latina who predominantly serves Latinas and other folks of color. So I'm sitting with, what does it look like right now to navigate this time when folks are feeling a little more hesitant, a little more nervous to give money to the type of work I do? What is my purpose in having this business? Was it about Latinas? Is it still about Latinas? What is the unique thing I'm doing for them that I don't think anyone else is doing? And if I believe that I am the person best suited to be doing this work, then damn it, I better not give up. I better find another angle. I better make it work to keep this business going. But if I can't answer that question with this is my purpose and this is the unique thing that I'm doing that nobody else is doing, then I should go find an organization or some business or something where I wholeheartedly believe in their purpose and can give my energy 100% to them. And so I think those are the questions we don't grapple with enough. I think sometimes it's just we saw somebody else who had one. Maybe it just feels cool to start a business. To the question that I mentioned earlier that got me in that group coaching program, some of us are just burnt out and just don't want to work for somebody because we've had really negative experiences. Maybe that just means there's some unpacking, some nervous system work, some therapy to do more so than I need to go now put myself into business ownership. Because I promise you, there's a whole other set of problems that are going to come up when you go into business. There's a lot of stuff I've had to grapple with where I've realized like, there's some stuff about myself I've never had to sit with because I worked in organizations with thousands of people I was interacting with every day, that now when I work by myself and it's me and a client, a lot of that stuff can't be hidden anymore. And there's a lot of personal work I have to do as well. So I think we have to ask ourselves deep questions about our purpose, what it is that we're starting and why, and are we the only one doing that thing, or can we go support someone else? Because I think that's why a lot of businesses also fail, is because there wasn't enough purpose behind it. And there was actually 10 other people doing it that just needed more support, not necessarily that another one needed to be offered.
These are the things that sometimes we as leaders need to hear and just be challenged on, so that way we can stand firm in our purpose and our choices and our decisions. You mentioned that you are going to be shifting away from the Chingona sabbatical, that you've put that on pause, but how can people work with you now? Like, is there any way that people can get this amazing coaching, leadership training with the programs that you have now?
Yeah. I feel like the core services have stayed the same. I've been now full-time in this for 4 years, and one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and speaking have been here since the beginning, and they're still here. I think to what I just said, the angle, the focus of each one has shifted over the 4 years, and I'm rethinking again. So with Chingona Sabbatical, that was more like a passion project, a thing that I still very deeply believe in. But what I found was, to what I just said, there's actually organizations now that are funding sabbaticals for the Latinx community. So do I need to keep trying to figure out how to create this thing and bring people into it? Or can I now partner with organizations who are actually giving substantial amounts of money to organizations for leaders to go take sabbaticals, and I get to coach them through that? So an example I'll give is the Latino Community Foundation, based out here in California, now started a program where they fund executive directors of Latinx organizations, Latinx Run, Latinx Serving, to take 3-month sabbaticals. And I'm part of a team of coaches that we come in and we actually prepare them to go on the sabbatical. So we work with them, we work with their teams, we coach them during their sabbatical, we coach their teams during their sabbatical, and then we support them to come back and reintegrate back into the work they're doing. I still have a place where I'm getting to support people with sabbaticals, but maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be my program right now. So that's one way that it's shifted. I'm still doing the work and it's still rooted in my purpose and what's really important to me. But I've now been able to find a little more ease in it by partnering with them as opposed to still figuring out launching and all these other things I was doing before. Group coaching, again, thinking about Chingona sabbatical, I learned the structure of it. I learned what's great about bringing people together and how to work in a virtual space with a lot of people. Taking that model, I started thinking about where are the places where not enough people are getting that kind of space. And so in a lot of organizations, especially if you're in a national organization, you could be the only one in your whole office who's a Latinx person. And you want to connect with the other people who are leaders across the country who are having similar experiences to you. So group coaching became more of a package that I was offering to organizations. And I'm happy to support and coach your Latinx leaders to have a space where they can safely discuss their experiences, grow, have some leadership development, and all of that. And so being able to use more of my experience, being able to take the model that I had, group coaching has become something where now I've been supporting groups of leaders within organizations. And then the speaking has just been evolving into more and more platforms. So when I started off, I wanted to, again, speak more about personal experience. And I think what I've learned in my journey as a business owner is I know what I'm good at in terms of service, one-on-one group and speaking. But I've had to ask myself repeatedly, how do I stop taking myself and my experience out of the center of it? That's my expertise, but I need to center more of what the client is asking for. And if there comes a time when the client's asking for things that don't feel matched to what I want to give, well, then again, I got to ask myself if this is still the business I want. But the tide has shifted to a lot more people wanting to talk about stress reduction and overwhelm and how do we actually sustain people in this work long term. So nervous system trauma-informed care has become much more of my speaking platform lately. There was for a while a lot of people asking me to do some talks around equity. That's not necessarily what people are asking for right now, but it still matches my expertise. I'm kind of following where people are. I'm also doing some landscape analysis right now about like, what do I think is going to be the next conversation that's coming? And I really believe healing-centered leadership, as hard as it is to believe with everything we're seeing happening right now, I have to believe that at some point this is going to break and there's going to be people asking for something different. So I've also been doing a lot of research and kind of thinking about what would it look like to be ready for that to be the next conversation that comes later as well. So the core services are still there. I think I'm just always asking myself, what do people want? What do people need? And what's the next conversation that's coming? And if it's tied to my experience and what I care about, then I want to be ready to serve. And if it's not, then that's when we think about other things that we might be doing instead.
I love that. I love the space that you provide for when things shift. Because I think a lot of times as business owners, we think like we have to keep going at this one thing that we started and don't give ourselves permission to like move or shift because we don't want people to say anything and we don't want people to like get upset. And so I love that you are staying true to your being as a whole, as a human, and your expertise. And so I think that is great wisdom for leaders in general. But how can people connect with you and find you and want like if they want to work with you?
Yeah, then go to my website, michelleseijas.com. And from there, you can sign up for my email list. I've got a weekly email that I send out where I share some of these conversations that are happening in my coaching space when I'm working with clients. What are the hot topics that folks are trying to navigate right now? And most of my clients, again, are Latinas. So a lot of the times the conversations are centered around Latinas and what we're experiencing. On Instagram, you can find me at Thriving Chingona. And on LinkedIn, I'm at Michelle Seijas, EDD.
Awesome. And I always like to leave my audience with a piece of advice. And you have given so much advice, but is there one thing that has like stuck with you throughout the years that you've been in this leadership position that you're just like, this one piece of advice really changed me and like I just live by it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been the thread in our conversation today is you have to give yourself space to really pause and check in on, is this really me? How is my body responding to this people and the environments that I'm in? And are there adjustments that need to be made? I thankfully had that 6-month sabbatical to like go deep, deep, deep. But I also believe that people can do it in 2-minute spurts, 30-minute spurts, whatever time you've got on a regular basis. In whatever time frame you have, just sit and ask yourself, how is this feeling? Is this a match for me? Or are there some shifts that I need to be making?
Awesome. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. I really appreciate your time and just like calm presence. Like I really appreciate you like if people watch on YouTube, like they can see your regulated being as you're speaking, and I just love that. Like I know we're not in person, but I can definitely feel it. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything, for taking time to be on the podcast with me today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me and for letting me be a part of your community.
All right. And hopefully you can make it back to Chicago sometime and we can meet in person and maybe get some collaboration, some event going.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Okay, amigos, thank you so much for listening. Please rate and review this podcast so we can get more ears listening to these stories and we can continue elevating la cultura. You can also comment on our YouTube video if you're watching online. I always like to hear from people and how they resonate with the stories I share. All right, enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, y nos vemos next week. Bye.